I should make myself a little bit bigger, huh? Hi, kitties. How are you? Good morning. This is Dr. Annette or Miss Feravich or Dr. Feravich. I prefer Dr. Annette because I worked hard. I worked hard for this, even though I keep getting on late. But I was up early. I was working hard on this and the Bookless classroom, too. Got some new info for the Bookless classroom. Kind of worked on it earlier and then got together at the last minute. But we're not here for that. We are here for our story today, right? So, our early bird classroom. And today we have a new story. So, the last time we met on Thursday, what did we do? We finished off our stories on Tales of Virtue, right? And do you remember what our last story was? Whew. Even I was just working on it and I already forgot. But that just reminded me. I was just working on it and I already forgot. Isn't that what it was? Wasn't it on work? No, maybe not. No, it was on honesty. Let's take a look at it because we have to do a review for this anyway. So let's review. It was on honesty is what it was. You know, it was about Daniel, and I was reminded about Daniel as well when I was thinking about working. Because when I was thinking about working one time, because Daniel really, he was honest, and that was not easy. It actually took a lot of work for Daniel to be honest. He was really a hard worker. He was a hard worker because he was he remember what he was doing. He was keeping the laws, right? So he was keeping the laws regarding what he could eat, and he was working very hard to stick with his diet is what he was doing. But that wasn't the story. It was on honesty. It wasn't on work. But that's how I was reminded of work because he was really a hard worker. I remember that. Because remember, here he is. No, these pictures are really good too. No, don't give me that food that is too rich and not healthy. That really is sometimes hard for me to resist food that is, I like rich food. I do. But I also don't like food that's not healthy, right? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. I do. Sometimes I like ice cream. I do. And sometimes I like the ice cream that's got lots of caramel in it too. I do. So we're going to get back to this story in a minute, but there were a few other things that I wanted to tell you about. Another thing, so that was the last story in our Tales of Virtue. So we're going to do a little review today of that story. We're going to go over those questions that we had. But also, what I promised was that we would read this story, right? Sneetches. And if you're here to read Sneetches with me, you're going to have to come back on Thursday because I am not going to read this Dr. Seuss Sneetches today. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I'm always looking for new stories and new things to teach you guys and talk to you guys about. And I knew that I had some new books, right? That I had to decide what I was going to pick from. And remember, I was talking to you about that there were some good stories in this book, which are also about virtues, but these are animal stories in here. So these are classic animal stories, and these are really good. So what do they mean by classic? What does that mean, classic animal stories? These were classic even in my day. Even when I was young, these were classic. And that meant that they were old when I was little. So that's what makes them classic. They're very old stories. Stories that people tell, and then they tell their kids, and then their kids tell their kids. And that's how these stories get passed down. So that's why they're classic stories. So remember, so we're going to get to some of these because these are really good stories because they're animal stories that tell us about virtue and character. And we know what virtues are, right? They are things that we do that are right. Because remember, we saw that from the tales of virtue here, right? So we were talking about virtues here, right? So, and this is what? This is a book of right and wrong, right? So virtues are all those things in this book that we do that are right. Okay? All right. So that's that. So this is some different stories on virtue, right? On virtue and character. These are how we build our personalities. These are how we build to be the people we are. Okay? All right, because those are the things that we're doing, especially in the Bookless classroom. We're learning more about being a character. I'm sure some of you are characters, right? But we're learning about being a character. Okay, so there's that book. And then there's also this book. So in looking at all of these books and deciding on some new stories, remember, I just decided on Sneetches, right? So we're supposed to watch or read Sneetches. But when I was reading this and looking at this, I came across a story. And this book is so beautiful. Let me move this down a little bit. This book is so beautiful. I can move it back too. With its great, big, beautiful, colorful pictures. I just love this book. But I came across a story. And the story is called Androcles and the Lion. Androcles and the Lion. And the reason why I'm reading this story to you this morning is because it is similar to the story of Daniel. Okay, so let me tell you something about these stories, okay? That I'm going to tell you, or this one that I'm going to read. When we read stories, these stories were from what? These stories were from the Bible, okay? So it's the beginner's Bible, and we were talking about these stories that were from the Bible. And remember what I said. I said that a lot of times when we were saying these people, right, these people of the Bible, what we were talking about is we were talking about the Israelites, right? Remember, we were talking about the Israelites. We were talking about the Jews, right? Jewish people. Okay, well, they weren't the only people on the planet, obviously, right? Because we talked about people from Moab. We talked about people from Egypt. We talked about people from all over different lands, right? Okay. And so now what we're doing is I came across this story, and this story is about people from other lands. They are stories about people from Rome and from Greece, okay? So they talk about different kinds of gods, but the same kind of story. What we see a lot of times is that we can have different kinds of people, right? Just like we said, there were the Israelites, but there were also people from Egypt in the Bible. There were people from Moab from the Bible, right? So we said lots of different people. But what we find is a lot of times we have similar stories. I might have even mentioned this before to you, that the story of Noah, right, and the flood, well, that story is told by a lot of different people that come from different places, right? Like here in the United States, we have people who used to live here, the Indians, who told stories about floods. There were stories in Egypt that told stories about floods. And so when I was looking for another story for you, I was looking in this book, and what I found was a story kind of like Daniel. And so since we just finished the story in the Bible on Daniel, I wanted to read this story. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to try and see how this story is like our story of Daniel and how this story is different from our story of Daniel, okay? So this story is from the people who are this is a story that is from the Greeks, but also the Romans as well. Okay? All right. They're kind of the same. One's older than the other one. That's the best way I can explain it right now. Okay, so let's look at this and look at again with these beautiful pictures that we have. Okay, I think what I'm going to try and do. No, I think I'm okay. I'm going to do it this way. Okay. In ancient Rome, there lived a poor slave named Androcles. His cruel master made him work from daybreak until long past nightfall. Androcles had very little time to rest and very little time to eat. One day he decided to run away from his harsh master, even though he would be breaking the law. In the dark of night, Androcles got up from the miserable heap of straw and rags that served as his bed. Crouching low, so he was no taller than the bushes that dotted the fields, the young slave moved swiftly away from his master's land. So he's running away from his cruel master, right? But it also sounds like he's very young, doesn't it? Because he's not much taller than the bushes that were in the field. So he's a young boy, right? It sounds like. Clouds covered the moon that night, and Androcles crossed the open fields unseen. So that means he was going to a place. They kind of talk a little different sometimes in these classic stories. Why? Because they're older, right? They're older stories. So they kind of talk sometimes a little different than we talk today. Clouds covered the moon that night, and Androcles crossed the open fields unseen. I just read that. It was only when he came to the wild woods that Androcles dared to stand up tall again. So he may be a little bit, he was bigger than the bushes because he crouched down. Androcles found a sheltered place at the foot of a tall tree. There he lay himself down on a bed of pine needles and fell asleep. Gotta make sure this is all in the picture, and it is. Good. Oh. When Androcles awoke, he hiked deeper into the woods so he wouldn't be found by his master. There he looked for water and something to eat, but other than a few berries, there was no food to be found. Day after day, Androcles searched for food, and day after day he went hungry. Androcles grew so weary and weak that at last he was afraid he wouldn't live through the night. He had just enough strength to creep up to the mouth of a cave that he had passed many times. Androcles crawled into the cave and fell into a deep sleep. As Androcles lay sleeping, a lion was hunting in the woods nearby. The lion liked to sleep in the daytime and hunt for his food at night. The lion caught a small animal for his supper. He ate his meal beside a stream in the woods. Then he set off for his cave as the morning began to fill the sky with light. Just before reaching the cave where Androcles slept, the lion stepped on the fallen branch of a thorn tree. A large thorn went deep into his paw. The lion let out an angry roar, which woke Androcles with a terrible start. A terrible start means like he was startled. That's what that means. He went, "Ooh," like that. That's what that means. It is part of the word startle. So let me read that again. The lion let out an angry roar, which woke Androcles with a terrible start. From the mouth of the cave, Androcles could see the lion rolling on the ground in pain. The lion's roars echoed loudly in the cave. Androcles was terrified that the lion would attack him, but the lion held out his paw, his hurt paw, to Androcles. Even from a distance, Androcles could see the large thorn in the lion's paw. Androcles found some courage and came closer. He slowly sat down on the ground near the beast. To Androcles' astonishment, the huge lion flopped his great paw into the young man's lap. Androcles spoke soothing words to the lion as he carefully pulled the thorn from the lion's paw. "Don't worry, handsome lion. We'll have this thorn out in no time," he said softly. The lion seemed to understand that Androcles was trying to help him. When the thorn was gone, the lion rubbed his head against Androcles' shoulder and purred a rumbling purr. Androcles was no longer afraid of the lion. The lion was grateful to Androcles and didn't even mind that Androcles had moved into his cave. The lion slept most of the day, and at night he hunted for food while Androcles slept. In the morning, the lion would bring fresh meat to Androcles, who would build a little fire to cook his meal. Every morning after Androcles ate, he and the lion played for a while in the woods nearby. The lion showed Androcles how much he liked him by rubbing his head against the young man and licking his hands and feet. My little puppy Lucy does that. She's not a puppy, but she's little. Androcles scratched the lion behind the ears and petted his sleek back. That's what I do to Lucy too. I scratch her behind the ears and she loves it. And then I go right down her back like that because she loves it when I rub her down her back like that. It helps relax her, right? Just like somebody rubbing your neck or your back helps relax you. That helps relax Lucy too. So I bet that lion was pretty relaxed, right? That's so nice. No wonder the lion wanted to go get Androcles' food, right? And then Androcles cooked it. What a nice relationship they seem to have, right? Let's look at the time over here. Okay. Androcles enjoyed his life with the lion very much. Thanks to the lion's successful hunting, Androcles was stronger and happier than he had ever been. When the lion lay down in the cave for his daytime sleep, Androcles would hunt for berries and nuts in the woods. It no longer mattered that he could not find enough berries and nuts for a man to live on. One morning, as Androcles was cooking what the lion had brought him, 5 soldiers suddenly appeared and surprised him. "We saw the smoke from your fire," they said. "We have come to arrest you for running away from your master." Androcles tried to run from the soldiers, but they were too fast for him. 3 soldiers sprinted after Androcles. When they caught him, they tied his hands behind his back. Sounds like he was in trouble, huh? The lion awoke with the start. The same thing. I heard something, right? He was startled, right? Did you ever wake up from a startle? Before he could even get to his feet, the other 2 soldiers threw a strong rope net over him so he couldn't escape. They attached 2 ends of the net to a stout poke and carried the angry lion out of the woods. See what they're saying here? See what they're describing right there? So when they're saying a stout poke, what they're saying is these these pieces of wood there, right? Long posts, like, kind of made out of sort of tree limbs or something like that. Androcles, his hands bound behind him, was forced to march to Rome. He felt terrible that he had brought harm to his beloved friend the lion. It was only when Androcles and the soldiers marched into Rome that he learned what was in store for him. I didn't clean these glasses very good, I don't think. The soldiers led Androcles towards a huge arena. One soldier said to Androcles, "You shall regret the day you ran away from your master. Your punishment is to fight a hungry lion." It was the custom in Rome at that time to entertain the people with battles. These battles were fought on the sandy floor of the arena, which was circled by rows and rows of seats. The soldiers took Androcles to a prison under the arena seats. Then they left him alone in the prison cell. A long time passed, but the soldiers did not return. From time to time, Androcles heard the roar of hungry lions in another part of the arena. At last, Androcles heard a trumpet blast. Then he heard hundreds of feet shuffling overhead as people made their way to the seats in the arena. So he was underneath this arena. And that's really a great description of exactly what they did back in the Roman days, back in when they had gladiators. This is exactly a very, very good description. Some of these things I didn't really realize that they were underneath. And so when the people came into the stadium here, see all the people there? He was still underneath. Androcles was still underneath, is what they said. And so he could hear all of the people coming in. That must have been very frightening. I would think that would be very frightening because he knew, Androcles had to know what happened in these stadiums. He had to know, right? What do you think is going to happen there, though? What do you think is going to happen? Look at that. What do you think is going to happen? Another blast sounded from the trumpet, and the bars to Androcles' prison were opened. The soldiers roughly pulled Androcles out of his cell and pushed him into the field. Then the prison bars went down again. So he must have come from something like this, where there were prison bars like that. He was underneath. The bars opened up, and he had to come up into the field. It sounds like to me. Androcles found himself in the middle of a huge arena. Hundreds of people were watching him. Oh my gosh, could you imagine? When a lion's roar sounded throughout the arena, the people grew excited. Poor Androcles felt sick with fear when he saw a lion in a cage at the far end of the arena. The trumpet sounded a third time, and the bars to the lion's cage were opened. Oh, can you see the picture? What do you, look at that, of course. A lean lion bounded out of the cell, roaring with hunger. The crowd of people shouting in the arena sounded just like another mighty roar in Androcles' ears. I'll be able to read this and still see that you see the picture. The lion crouched only for a moment, but in that moment, Androcles recognized his friend from the forest. The lion let out another thundery roar and bounded across the arena in 3 long leaps. He stopped right in front of Androcles and then gently lifted his big paw. Androcles gave a mighty shout of joy. "Lion, you remember me," he cried. He took the lion's paw in his hand and patted it lovingly. Then the lion rubbed his great head against the young man's shoulder. The crowd of people in the arena was stunned into silence. They wondered why the hungry lion did not attack Androcles. The emperor motioned to Androcles. How did you tame this ferocious lion? The emperor asked Androcles. I merely helped him when he needed help, Your Highness, Androcles replied. That is why he spared my life. The emperor freed Androcles and the lion. The lion returned to the wild woods, and Androcles became a free man in Rome. So these are the Romans, is what I said. Androcles often went for a walk in the woods to visit his good friend who never forgot him. Oh my gosh, what an unbelievable story, right? So you can see why I wanted to read that story after our story of Daniel, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the questions. Although I have to say, I read this story last night. I planned to have this story, right? Because Thursday I was going to have a different story. So planned to have the story and read the story last night and came up with some questions. But as usual, I think of some other questions after I read this story to you. Like questions about friendship, right? Questions about so many of these virtues that we learned. Remember, we had a virtue of friendship here that we learned, and that was the story of David and Jonathan, right? David and Jonathan. And David was a warrior, kind of like Daniel is. He was faithful like Daniel, not really a warrior, but he had to like David also, he was a warrior, right? Remember Saul? He was throwing those spears at him, right? And so David was kind of like Daniel, that he had to be strong too, right? And we didn't even have that virtue in here, right? But we did have the virtue of courage. And so we saw Androcles also had to have courage. Our story of Esther is the story of courage. Do you remember that story? That story is the one where she had to ask the king to not kill her people. Remember that? What a great story that was. I was reminded of Esther for Easter. Just when we celebrated Easter, I was reminded of Esther again. It's so interesting to me, this story of Esther and Easter, and that her name kind of sounds like Easter. It's so interesting to me. So that's what a lot of times we do, is when sometimes we go in one direction, right? But we think about something that's really interesting, and then we kind of move in another direction. And remember what I said to you before about that? I told you that sometimes, maybe I said it to this class, I can't remember, but it doesn't matter whether I said it to you or not. We're going to say it again. Is that sometimes people tell you that it's not good. You got to stay on task, stay on task, stay on task, stay on task, right? Some people say, and if you're not staying on task, that's not good. Well, I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's true. I think it's good. I think it was really good that I changed my mind and didn't stay on task and went and read the Androcles story after I was going through the books and looking through stories, because I probably forgot what I was supposed to be doing over here and started looking at the books and reading the stories. Do you see sometimes how when we go down a different path, how sometimes that can be very good for us? I'm not saying that we don't have to get things done. We have to get things done, right? But as long as you're getting the things done that you need to get done, nobody should bother you so much with how you get them done, right? Right? You know, and as long as you're not hurting anybody while you're getting them done, right? Nobody really should bother you so much about how you're getting them done. So you can see, I think of a lot more things when I read it a second time. I think of a lot more things to talk about. Now, we're going to get to our questions, but don't forget tomorrow, or Thursday, because tomorrow we're doing our phonics. Tomorrow we're doing phonics. On Wednesdays we do phonics. So Thursday we're going to get to Dr. Seuss's Sneetches. All right? Okay, let's go ahead and get to our questions. Okay, so we are on day 16 of our classroom, if you can believe that. So our lesson is on Androcles and the lion, and this is from Children's Classics. And we want to compare the two stories, the story of Daniel and his honesty with the story of Androcles and the lion. Okay, so the first question is, what happened to Androcles? Why didn't he want to work for his master? Why didn't the lion eat Androcles? Kind of jumped right to that question, didn't I? What do you think would happen if you were kind to an enemy? Have you ever been kind to an enemy? Sorry about that. Have you ever been kind to an enemy? What happened? How is the story about Androcles and the lion similar to the story of Daniel and the lion's den? Why was Daniel thrown? Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our questions that we had on Daniel. So this will kind of remind us a little bit of Daniel, because remember, we're supposed to go back and review the questions. So why was Daniel thrown into the lion's den? Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, if you remember, because he wasn't following the king's rules, right? And what were the king's rules? The king's rules had to do with the diet, right? Well, didn't Androcles have something to do with food as well, right? Not exactly the same thing, but they had something to do with food, right? Why was the king happy? Why was the king in Daniel's story happy? And if you remember, the reason the king was happy was because I'm getting back to the story again right now. He was happy because he liked Daniel. Daniel was very smart, if you remember. So it said that he was very handsome too, but he was also very smart, and he was healthy. And so that's why the king liked Daniel. He liked Daniel because he was healthy, right? And he kind of liked Daniel as well because Daniel had courage to say no, 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 right? And it was really these other people that were trying to trick the king into not liking Daniel, right? And they thought they were wise men. Remember that? They thought they were wise men, but they couldn't tell the king what? They couldn't tell the king about his dream. Remember that? Remember they couldn't tell the king about his dream? Okay, I don't think I had that in one of the questions. So the king was happy because he liked Daniel. What is honesty? How was Daniel honest? So we know honesty is always, the word is always defined right at the very beginning of the book, the story, right? So here we have honesty. Honesty means to tell the truth to ourselves and to others. That, I kind of missed that part the last time I read it. Sometimes when you reread stories, you pick up new things again. I didn't catch that part that honesty means to tell the truth to ourselves as well, right? We have to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes we think that nobody else knows the truth, right? Sometimes we think that nobody else knows the truth. And that can be true. Nobody else knows the truth. But we do. We know the truth. And sometimes it's important for us to tell ourselves the truth. Now, it doesn't mean we have to tell everybody the truth, does it? No, it does not. our truth, when we tell the truth to ourselves, that's like telling the truth to God. And then you and him, you guys have a deal, right? You guys kind of have a deal over here. He knows you and you know him, right? God doesn't let you get away with things, does he? Right? God does not let you get away with things. So sometimes we have to be honest to other people, right? But in Daniel's case, he didn't eat that food, but he didn't have to tell anybody else, right? He was just kind of minding his own business is what he was doing, right? So kind of an interesting thing about honesty. Sometimes if we do something to somebody else, we have to be honest about it. But sometimes we just have to be honest to ourselves. And that's a very good practice for us to help us be honest with God as well, right? That's a really good practice to help us be honest with God. Because sometimes the whole idea is that we think nobody's watching. Sometimes the whole idea is that we think that nobody's watching. And sometimes we have to remember that the person that is watching is God, right? Even when nobody else is watching, the person that is watching is God. And guess what? Even when everybody else is watching, sometimes they don't know either, do they? They don't know what's in our hearts. Sometimes even when everybody else is watching, they don't know what's in our hearts. But God does. That's the good thing. That's a really good thing about being honest. That's a really good thing about being honest, is that everybody else can see what's going on, but it doesn't mean that they know the truth, right? It doesn't mean that they know the truth. What was being honest? Being honest was telling the truth, right? Sometimes to ourselves. That's what being honest was about, remember? To tell the truth to ourselves and to others. But we don't have to tell other people when it's not their business, right? That's between you and God. Boy, that's kind of a deep dive for an early bird classroom, isn't it? That was a little bit of a deep dive. Sometimes we do talk a little bit about things that are just a little bit older than just learning our ABCs, right? Because that story about Androcles really was a little bit more, it was certainly more for a little bit older kids than this was, right? So you can see how we can sometimes jump to some things that are for just a little bit older kids as well, right? That's why I said it doesn't really matter the age that you come to these classrooms. It really doesn't matter what age you are when you come to these classrooms. Because if you think that you could learn something, come to the classroom. Doesn't even matter. Maybe you just like to be read to. Sometimes you like the stories. Okay, all right. That's our time for today. I think I got through all the questions. Let's see here, the review questions. How was Daniel honest? Right? So we already talked about that. Why did the king want Daniel to work for him in the palace? Because he was smart and honest. Because Daniel was smart and honest. Why didn't Daniel want to eat the king's food? Do you think Daniel should have at least tried the king's food? We're going to come back to that question because I'm out of time and I really want to make sure that I've got the half an hour in between this class and the next class. And the next class, I will see you at 9:15 in the Bookless classroom. And we're going to be talking about the Bill of Rights in that classroom. Okay? All right. Thank you for joining me. This is Dr. Annette or Dr. Annette Feravich, Dr. Feravich. This is the early bird classroom. And I'm the teacher. That's it. Okay, thanks for joining me.